Well, good afternoon, everyone. I have 3 o'clock on my computer. This is Stacy Fox with the Cattle Raisers Association. Just want to welcome all of you today. If I can ask a couple of you, if you can hear us okay, to jump in that chat box or the question and answer and just let us know how our audio sounds. Excellent. We've got some good stuff. Thank you so much. Well, thank you all for being on with us this afternoon. We're very glad that you were able to take time out of your schedule to join us for this topic. And please know that in these uncertain times, TSCRA is still working very hard on your behalf. And we're here if you need anything. Our offices, we're a lot of us are working remotely, but we're still here working very hard for you. And so I just want to reiterate that and thank you for your support of TSCRA. All of your lines are muted so that we can hear our speakers well. There were over 400 people registered for this webinar. So if we let everybody talk at once, it would be a madhouse. But you can put any questions into that chat box or to the Q&A. And if we have time at the end, then we'll be able to get to some of those questions. So with that, you're not here to hear me. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers and let them jump right into the meat of the conversation today. So our first speaker is going to be Jeffrey or Jeff Stolle. He's the Vice President of Marketing for Nebraska Cattlemen in Lincoln, Nebraska. Mr. Stolle was born and raised on a family-owned cow-calf and row crop farming operation near Wharton, Texas, on the Central Coast been between Houston and Victoria. He's an animal science graduate of Texas A&M University, and after receiving his undergraduate degree in December of 1989, Jeff remained at Texas A&M and did graduate work in feed yard management and beef cattle marketing before joining the Nebraska Cattlemen Association as a market analyst in the summer of 1991. Jeff has served as Vice President of Marketing and the lead staff person for the association's Market Reporting Service since 1994. The Market Reporting Service currently provides up-to-the-minute market information for approximately 300 feed yards in Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, Minnesota, and Illinois. Jeff is also the primary staff person for the association's Marketing and Commerce Committee and Nebraska Cattlemen staff liaison to NCBA on marketing and risk management issues. Jeff and his wife, Sarah, feed cattle on their own account in Nebraska custom feed yards and also work as sales representatives for Crossroads Cattle Company of Austin, Texas, marketing calves and yearlings from throughout the United States into Midwestern feed yards. And then once Mr. Stolle finishes up, we'll go right into our next speaker, who will be Stan Beavers. He's no stranger to cattle raisers events, so I know you've heard Mr. Beavers quite often. Mr. Beavers owns Ranch KPI LLC, which is a ranch management consulting company. He also holds an appointment with King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management with Texas A&M University, Kingsville. After a tenure of 27 years, Mr. Beavers retired in 2016 as a professor and extension economist from the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. He was awarded Professor Emeritus and Extension Specialist status in April 2017 by the Board of Regents of the Texas A&M University System. Beavers received his BS in Agricultural Education from Cameron University in Lawton, Oklahoma, and his MS in Agricultural Economics from Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. Beavers specializes in utilizing key performance indicators to evaluate ranch management information systems for the purpose of ranch accounting, ranch analysis, and finding ranch efficiencies. He and his wife, Tina, have 2 children, Dana, who lives with them, and Jana, who is married to Jonathan Ramirez and lives in Vernon, Texas. They have 2 grandchildren, Natalie and Nathan, and all of them are involved in Broken Bee Cattle, the family farming and ranching operation. So as you can see, we have 2 speakers that I think are very qualified to talk to us today about what's been happening in the cattle market and maybe what we can expect to see. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Jeff Stolle and take it away.
Well, Stacy, trying to get, okay, here we go. Can everyone hear me okay and see the slide?
I can. Yes, sir. You look great.
Very good. Folks, I'm honored to be asked to be on this panel with Dr. Beavers today. As you heard from my introduction, I am not a trained economist. You will probably become more more aware of that as I go through my presentation. That said, I've been sitting in the same chair for almost 28 years now, concentrating on market information at the fed cattle beef packer interface. So I feel like I have seen a few things at this point in time, although I've never seen what we're going through now. These are uncertain times, and navigating them, I'm sure, will be a challenge for everyone. I'm going to try to take a look in my presentation at some underlying market factors that kind of help get us to where we are at this point. And then I think Dr. Beavers intends to take a bit more of a look into the future as to how operations might be able to navigate these waters. My first slide here is January 1 total cow inventories. I think really to get a good handle on where we are at this point, one must go back to at least as far as 2011. A lot of you folks probably have 2011 and 12 burned into your memories in a bad way. We cut into the Texas mama cow herd by 22 to 25% at that point in time as drought forced liquidation throughout the industry, but in the biggest ways in Texas and Oklahoma. That set off a number of market factors that I think are still factors with us today. So I wanted to start with this total cow inventory slide and the observation that as of today, we have rebuilt the nation's cow herd and therefore rebuilt our ability to produce beef back to the point that it was before that drought took place. We're still doing it with a few less cows, but we are able to produce plenty pounds at this point. I've always liked this next slide a bit because I think it does a good job of correlating the effect of the drought and the response in prices. There's nothing magic about a Western Kansas 5 to 6 weight calf other than that was the data set that I was easiest able to put my hands on, and I did not have Texas data right in front of me where I could put together something like this in a short period of time. But as you can tell, and as you saw in your businesses through these last few years, quite a spike in prices as the effects of the drought caused us to be able to produce less beef for a number of years as we were rebuilding the cow herd. Next slide is January 1 feeder cattle supplies. And again, you can tell that we have very nearly come back to having the same kind of supplies outside the feed yards at the first of the year than we did before the drought. I think I want to mention two things, or one thing importantly here before I go into this next slide. As a result of the drought, in the years following, amongst the tightest inventories and the tightest supplies of fed cattle, we took a number of pieces of packing infrastructure offline in our industry I would say the largest of those was Cargill's plant at Plainview, Texas. In large part, that infrastructure that was taken offline during the drought basically remains idle today. We have added, I think, some capacity back in spots, or maybe increased capacity in spots in existing facilities. But as far as any new facilities of size or bringing any of the idled infrastructure back, that has not happened really to any great extent. Therefore, we're dealing with an environment where, if you look at fed cattle numbers and inventories at this time versus packing industry infrastructure, there are plenty cattle for the amount of hook space that we're dealing with at this point. Now, where are those cattle in a general sense? Going to this next slide, at this point in time, they're in the Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma Panhandle, and they're in Kansas, more so than they are in the Midwest. We've seen a shift in inventories in the feeding industry over the last few years, as the Texas cow herd in particular has been built back. And a year ago, the winter conditions here in Nebraska and along the I-80 corridor and north were simply miserable. And I think we have seen some cattle be placed in Texas and Kansas here over the last 6, 8, 12 months that in previous years might have been placed north of I-70. So at this time, we're looking at inventories 3 to 4% greater in Texas and Kansas, and anywhere from 4 to 6% lower in Nebraska and Iowa. The Texas and Kansas data also are well above 5-year average levels, whereas the Nebraska and Iowa numbers as of USDA's March 1 data set were both 1% under 5-year average levels. So we've talked a little bit about where the numbers are. I'd like to go a little bit into some short-term fundamental aspects here. This chart is off of our Nebraska Cattlemen Market Reporting Service website. And to give you some background to operate with, obviously the hard black line is 2020 data. The red line represents 2019, and the blue line represents a 3-year average, which obviously at this point would be 17 through 19. We've had a relatively open winter, I would say, this year in Kansas, and I am told a really nice winter in the Texas Panhandle area. I've heard some feed yard performance stories out of Texas that are quite impressive. All that said, to get to the fact that steer carcass weights, and for that matter, heifer carcass weights, are well above both year ago and 3-year average levels. I would submit to you that we may be dealing with a market here that was set up to somewhat underwhelm expectations, even without the pandemic that we're dealing with at this point. This is weekly USDA beef production levels. Obviously, we have spent the vast majority of the first quarter here producing a good bit more beef on a weekly basis than what was the case a year ago, or obviously on the 3-year average. And in fact, tonnage levels that are exceeding summertime production a year ago on a weekly basis in a decent many weeks here. So we are putting plenty product on the market. This is total red meat production, obviously including pork and lamb for that matter, but primarily pork. Lamb is a very small portion of it. But we've actually been seeing pork production with larger week over week, well, year over year, excuse me, production level increases than we've seen for beef here lately. So we are dealing with a lot of protein on the market as we're dealing with a major market disruption at the same time. What we've seen over the last, I will say, couple of weeks, 10 days anyway, is what I have referred to with our membership as an acute short-term spike in retail demand. This is coming from a number of different driving factors, one of them being a shift in demand. Maybe I should more accurately call it a shift in logistics, as many operations in our HRI sector have been shut down or curtailed in the way that they can do business at this point in time. And obviously we have seen consumers come to the beef counter to stock up, if you will, in preparation in a good many cases for possibly spending quite some time in their residences. This has caused a spike in boxed beef prices, literally of magnitude that we've never seen before. When you measure it with USDA's Choice Boxed Beef Index, and that is depicted by this chart. This is the comprehensive boxed beef cutout, which includes more so the entire trade versus the first chart, which is a 1 to 21 day type of data set. So that shift in demand, or that shift in where we can put the product and make it available at this point in time, the data that I was able to find today on the beefitswhatsfordinner.com website indicated that in 2018, over 8 billion pounds of product went through the food service channels. That's out of a total production of some over 27 billion pounds. So it is a large logistical challenge at this point that our industry is called on to undertake to move, if you will, a lot of that consumption from food service channels into and through primarily retail channels. Restaurants and bars were 70% of that 2018 food service consumption. This gives you an idea of some of the food service channels: limited service restaurants, full service restaurants, education. We see a lot of different avenues that we have provided beef to consumers through food service for the last good many years in a growing fashion that are being affected here. This chart is a Nebraska dressed steer weekly weighted average. I realize there are not a whole lot of cattle sold on a dress basis in Texas. 200 dressed at a 63.5 hot yield comes to a 127 cash market. All that said, a very contra-seasonal move, especially over the last 6-7 weeks to the downside in live, and for that matter, dress cattle markets. Obviously, a sharp recovery this week. We saw live prices in the Texas Panhandle last week kind of trade in a range of 105 to 110, whereas this week most of that trade was in a 119 to 120 range. So a bit of a move this week that caught up to some extent with the rally in boxed beef prices. This is USDA's LMR purchase type breakdown, and the reason I wanted to show this slide, I feel like it is relative not only to live cattle prices, but it is also relative to boxed beef prices. As you see on the left, this is 2019 summary data, except for the Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico data, which was impacted by confidentiality guidelines during the fourth quarter. So it's 3-quarter data for that region. But we traded, just about 21% of our national fed cattle movement through LMR on a negotiated basis in 2019. And that choice box beef index that I showed earlier, USDA's morning and afternoon reports with the choice and select box beef indices, that report tends to catch about 15% of the total trade on any given week. I only point that out to say that the thinner in general a price discovery test becomes in any given market, generally we see an increase in volatility with that, and that can sure come into play when we're dealing with market disruptions as we're seeing at this point in time. And again, I apologize for not having Texas data to show you. These are a couple more charts just showing how and this is USDA data from the 12 or 14 auction markets that they report on a weekly basis in Nebraska, showing you how both yearling and calf prices have come under pressure in the last few weeks as we have seen the contra-seasonal pressure in fed cattle markets. This essentially would be a composite USDA index on a 850 weight steer here in Nebraska. As you can tell, being pressured $1,200–1,400 a hundredweight versus year ago levels. We have not seen quite as much pressure on the lighter cattle. I think part of that is simply because these lighter cattle still have more marketing options available moving forward. And maybe of more importance, the simple fact that those marketing options let these lighter cattle get farther out on the calendar, and therefore hopefully into a time frame where the country has started to recover from the economic impacts of the pandemic that's currently going on. More pressure on the 5-weight heifer, and quite honestly, these 5-weight classes at this time of the year are in thin supply here in our part of the world. But I think there are still spots where some of these northern heifers are bought at fairly light weights, roughed along a bit and then taken to grass to develop breeding females. And obviously, I think folks running those type of programs at this point in time would be quite cautious as we're looking at a questionable environment going forward, and whether we might be entering into a fairly significant liquidation of the cow herd due to the extenuating market factors. As the choice and select boxed beef indices have rallied sharply amid continued pressure for each week successively until this one, We have also seen a spike in margins at the packer processor level that basis our modeling here has even taken us well beyond levels that we saw following the fire at Tyson's Holcomb, Kansas plant back last summer. This chart would depict that. And this particular chart, it's a weekly chart, but I plugged in data through today's or yesterday's afternoon beef quotes just to give an idea how margins have spiked at that sector of our industry at this point. Taking a little bit of liberty then, this chart would indicate using this week's fed cattle trade in Nebraska, which I used 190 on a dressed basis. The input side of this chart is based on the 5-state USDA weighted average dress. And then I just plugged in steady box beef values for next week, just to give an idea how this week's sharp increase in fed cattle prices, if box beef levels were to remain steady next week, how it would make this chart look a bit different as of the coming week. We've got a 1-week time lag built into this model simply to acknowledge the fact that, you know, cattle don't come in the front door and product from those cattle go out the back door generally within the same couple, 3 days. So we use 1 week's weighted average buy versus the next week's closing box beef values to run this model each week. I will tell you up front that this model is not right per se for any given packer at any given time. That said, it's been run consistently for a good many years using the same data inputs. So I think it does do a decent job on a relative sense of kind of keeping a handle on the change in margins at the packer processor level. Where might we be headed going forward from a supply standpoint? This is our market reporting service on-feed data for March 1. Obviously, we saw February placements impacted a decent bit. We were down 14% on February placements in our data set. If you look at the shipping intentions data, April obviously is usually one of our tighter spots. Given the year, sometime March can be a bit tighter. I do think we've kind of put a few extra days on kind of the trailing end of the yearling run of cattle in our part of the world here. We have not seen quite as big a hole, if you will, between the end of the yearlings and what I refer to as the start of the calf feds in this part of the world. Given the sharply positive basis here over the last few weeks, we've seen a few of those calf feds start to be marketed, especially calves that were laid off against the board, where sellers could take advantage of the sharply positive basis. But as we move into May and June, supplies typically increase in our part of the world here. They will this year as well. But I've really been telling some of our members it's sure not completely about us, and it's not about the North as much as it would have been 2 or 3 years ago, in my opinion, just due to the fact of where the inventories right now reside, and that is more so south of I-70 than north. This is our weight breakdown data on 100-pound increments as of March 1st for steers and heifers. Not a lot of news here, but you can see the heifer inventory up 3% versus the steers down 1%. Again, just an indication that heifers are more so going to feed now that expansion has slowed insofar as the cow herd goes. This chart, as well as a number of them here, I've borrowed from our friends at the Livestock Market Information Center. This is a projection of commercial red meat production that ends with 2021 on the very right side. You can see the growth. Looking at beef production and the blue bars, maybe a tick down from last year for this year's production, but this one does a good job, I think, of giving an idea what we're looking at as far as total protein, including pork in 2019. And then here's the one that I call plus feathers. This also takes into account chicken and turkey production. So we are looking at generous production levels of protein here going forward. I I shudder to say a little bit that in most of the presentations that I've given here for our members in the last couple of years, I've kind of left with the thought that production to a certain extent is kind of baked in, and it's all about demand at this point. And I'm afraid, are looking at a substantive demand challenge right here as we work through the effects of the pandemic and the demand challenges associated with it. Folks, this is my contact information, and depending on how much time we have for questions here, I'd be happy to answer those I can. But Stacy, at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Beavers.
Sounds great. We'll take some questions at the end if we have time. But Stan, it's all yours now.
Working on it. All right. Everybody see that?
Yes, sir. It looks good.
All right. Here we go. Like Jeff, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys. Sorry, we're not sitting in Fort Worth at the Cattle Raisers Convention, visiting face to face, but I live out in the country like I'm sure probably a lot of you guys do. I've been practicing social distancing for the last 10 years and before it ever had a name. So some of us are doing that anyway. I'm going to take what Mr. Stolle has kind of laid the foundation and move through some things pretty quickly, but then get to the end and say, okay, now what's really going to happen here, and what's the effect going to be on you guys? So again, some of these slides I'm going to work through pretty quickly, and what we've seen. Well, there's a lot of uncertainty, but certainly there's some things that are very obvious about what's gone on: the closing of the businesses, basically the shutting down of the U.S. economy. Real question about how long that's going to last. President Trump says he'd love to have us back in business by Easter. I hope that is the case, because the second bullet, the longer this lasts, probably the longer the negativity is going to be, and the greater the effect is going to be on the cattle markets, whether it's going to be finished by summer or by the fall or by sometime next year. And I think all our preferences are that it's in sooner than certainly later. So cattle markets are trying to work their way back, but man, they've still got a long ways to go. Hopefully we've got a bottom in. We'll see whether that's the case or not. So I'm going to take what Mr. Stolle said and just move through it real fast. So where were we before all this happened, before the last month? Well, his last slide, or one of his last slides, was total meat production in the U.S. So where were we a month ago? Record beef, pork, and poultry projections. The cold storage report as well says there's lots of product. Our cow slaughter has been extremely high. Relatively speaking, which couple of things there. The short-term effect is that's actually kind of helping, because it's putting more ground beef into the market, which is certainly what the American consumer is demanding right now. But as we all know, if we kill the factory in the long term, that's going to reduce our beef supply, or our ability to put beef into the market. Also, at the same time, meat demand certainly very strong from a U.S. domestic standpoint. And I put in here HRI trade, the steaks, the people going out to the various steak houses. Gosh, anytime you used to travel and you'd want to get a steak somewhere to eat, it was always seemed like a 20 to 30-minute wait minimum to have a good steak at a good restaurant. And then as we all know, we became a hamburger nation as well. So the fast food service was certainly taking its share of the ground beef. And, and the old number that everybody used to quote was, well, ground beef consumption, it makes up about almost 60% of the total beef consumed in this country. So, that's a big number. But all of a sudden, out of those two, all of a sudden you shut down the top bullet, the restaurant hotel trade, and all of a sudden you've got product that sits there and needs to go somewhere else. So again, not only do you have from the restaurants problems of trying to get rid of that, what do I do with it? And as we heard in some cases, it was being given to various charity organizations and things like that just to get it out of the restaurants. So that's certainly, when you shut that down, has caused lots of problems. And then at the same time, everything that was in the pipeline that was headed there had to stop and be rerouted. So again, we're talking about a logistics issue here. Also, from an international standpoint, exports was doing very well. Could have been better, but they were certainly increasing because of the completed trade deals that President Trump has completed over the last 12, 18 months. Also, then retail beef prices, again, these, I just want you to kind of think about these, because we're going to come back to them here in just a little bit and try to make some judgment as to where this thing's happening or where it's going to happen. Retail beef price is not that big a deal. Since 2014, when everything was a record, still trading somewhere between $5.50 and $6 if you look at the USDA meat spread reports. It has not, retail beef, as we all know, had not fallen like all of us can remember selling, $1,000, $1,200 calves in 2014, and we're certainly not doing that today. So we've seen that fall off, but retail price not so much. As Mr. Dolly said, box beef prices, prior to this, somewhere between the 200 to 240. Again, climbing there and kind of being there for the last, really since late 2017. Again, that's what went on before the last month. Prior, again, live cattle prices anywhere from 110 to 130 since the 2014-15 records. Feeder cattle 130 to 160. Same time period. Calves anywhere from $1.50 to $2, and in some cases, when you go on back, even higher than that. Cull cows somewhere between 55 and 65. All right, so that lays the groundwork. That's what happened prior to the last month. Now then, now what? And we all sit here and concerned about this deal with every right to be. So now for the last month, what's going on? Well, retail prices hadn't risen that much actually in the retails, and the fact is it's because it's not there. And we have laws. I mean, I hate to say this, we actually have laws against price gouging, which is a good thing. Don't quote me on that. That's a good thing for people not to do any price gouging. So retail couldn't change a whole lot. And all of a sudden, what was available in the retail at the grocery stores and at the big warehouse companies, you go over there and there's nothing there. All the ground beef's gone. I made the point of going over to Wichita Falls late last week, and while I was there, I just happened to go by Sam's. Next thing I know, I could pick up any number of ribeyes or prime rib roast I wanted, but if I tried to find a pork loin or any type of ground beef at all, it just wasn't there. So again, we get into this hoarding deal, and that's just the way we've got it right now. Now that's going to change. I just love it when my phone goes off. So again, that's price from a retail standpoint really hadn't changed that much. Box beef, though, as Jeff pointed out, certainly big numbers there. Box beef jumped over 250. Yeah, packer margins over $500 a head. I'll just leave that laying right there. Then cattle, live cattle, my goodness. And again, thinking back to what I said earlier, the live cattle prices trading somewhere, in the 120 up to, or 1 to 120s. And now all of a sudden we're talking about trading down over the last month near $1. Now this week we traded mostly at $1.20, so we're trying to work our way back, but we're not back in the 130s like all of us would love to be. The feeder index, again, where we had talked earlier, in the 150s to 160s. Now we're talking about drop to $1.16. It's back up to $1.34 now. Again, we're starting to move some of these things, some of these cattle. The 550 calves dropped to the mid 150s, and again, those were up trading, in the last 2 years, up near $1.90 to over $2 a pound. I think it did drop to $1.50, but I know what most of us did. If we had 550-pound calves available to sell, we just stopped. Which is probably what all of us should do in this respect. I had kind of on the calendar to ship some calves just 2 weeks ago, and not only the rain, which was a good thing, kind of stopped me, but when I kind of saw what was going on, it's like, there's no way I'm going to sell calves right now. So the 550s, while the prices may have dropped, it was probably on calves that finally did get to the market that, again, where most of us probably weren't shipping at all. The funny thing about the cull cow prices, though, all of a sudden we start seeing those things rise. And again, that's more a function of those things being turned into ground beef, cull cows and the cull bulls. So those prices actually started to rise a bit. All right, so here we go. So what's all this mean? To teach this at not only the King Ranch Institute, but also last summer, back in January, Stacy and the folks at TSCRA and the King Ranch Institute hosted a cow-calf management business workshop. And I use a case study that I built based on all my consulting work that we call the 281 West Ranch. And what it is, it's a teaching case study that I'm able to look at not only the accounting of a ranch, but also coming up with what their key performance indicators are. And then in some respects actually say, okay, well, this is a base ranch. Now let's see what happens. Let's change some things and actually see what happens to this ranch. So this is where we're going to be. So here's the 281W ranch. It's a 1,000 cow operation. If that's too big to represent any of you guys, just move the decimal place and make it 100 cow operation. So it's not that big a deal. This is a 1,000 cow operation somewhere in Texas. Again, case study. It's a spring calving herd. They background their calves, but they do sell them prior to the end of the year, and they sell their cull cows and cull bulls in the fall. So how's this ranch going to be affected this year? Well, here is, and Jeff kind of talked about some of the calf prices. Here's 550-pound steer prices since January of 2017. We would love to think that this thing was kind of on the uptrend. You can very clearly see the drop in starting in really June, July of 2019. That was a seasonal thing up until the Finney County fire at the Tyson plant, which caused this thing to continue to go down even farther. We'd kind of reworked ourselves up there to about $1.80, so things seem like we're going pretty well for these type of calves. Now, seasonally, we would probably start moving into lower prices. Here's that same deal, but the 3-year average. Okay, so I took 2017, 18, and 19 just to see what normally happens with 5.5 weight calves. And again, what we're trying to look at is what the effect of this market change and scenarios that we're dealing with is going to affect this 281 ranch. So here we are, a 3-year average, and this isn't anything that's common, that's new knowledge to anybody. These calves tend to peak out. The prices tend to peak out in the spring, March, and April. tend to fall off and bottom out somewhere in September, October timeframe when everybody starts bringing calves to town. So again, that's a 3-year average for Oklahoma and Texas cattle prices. There's where we are now, okay? So no doubt the 5.5 weight prices have certainly come down. But again, as I mentioned earlier, I honestly don't know how many calves got sold at those. I don't think large volumes got sold at those prices. You know, you're talking about $1.58. I don't know that large volumes sold at those, because I know in North Texas, there obviously were a lot of people like me that were pulling calves back that just weren't going to sell calves given what the situation was. And next thing you know, you start seeing some sale barns saying, we're not even going to have a sale this week. I know that happened up here to some degree. So again, it's the fact that, but again, the fact is that's kind of where the prices were over the last month. Now then, if you think about building a budget for the year and how the finances are going to look for that 281 ranch, you do it based on the best guess of what you think. And that could be done in December of the previous year, or probably in January, when we're all sitting here, and whoever we're accounting to, whether it be our wives, our bankers, or to our chairman of the board, or whether it's our board members, we've all developed this budget. And now this 281 built the budget based on what their best guesses were. And now all of a sudden he's seeing this. Now the real question is, what's the future hold? And I can tell you, if I knew what the future hold, I wouldn't be telling you broadcasting it across the web. I would be holding those cards very simply to my chest and not telling anybody, but doing what I wanted to do. So given that, here's what it looks like. Now, what we would normally see these would be in the next 30 days, some of the highest prices for 5.5 weight calves. And then we would expect prices to go down. Well, I hate to believe that a 5.5 weight calf price right now, the high for it is going to be $1.58, because that means by the time you get to September and October, he's going to be in the $1.20s and $1.30s. So that is not very exciting. Now, that's a worst case scenario. Let's talk about best case scenario and really what we're looking at here. So again, that's where we are. And so here's his projections as of January. So this guy's got 479 steer calves, 268 heifer calves. He's going to sell 98 cull cows in the fall and 17 cull bulls. And you can see the prices that this guy built in. Okay, so there's his weaning weights of 555 on the steers, 517 on the heifers. $1.61 on the steers, $1.72 on his heifers. Somebody apparently he thinks he can get pretty decent price for his heifers. So again, that was his best guess back in December or January, before all this stuff happened. So if you look at that and you look at a 58-cent cull price on cows and a 70-cent cull bull price, he was looking at total revenue of about $750,000. His total expenses for his cattle was going to be about $728,000, which he had projected to make about $21,000, which would be a very positive year, because again, we are still selling calves way too cheap. Again, but it's a function of supply. It's a function of the total meat and total beef that's out there. We know we're killing cows. So again, we know we're kind of in the prospects of changing this cycle around, but right now we're still at a point where we're not building prices to any large degree. Now, throw in the last 3 weeks. And here's what it looks like now. So if I go in there and I drop his prices by about 15%, and again, those aren't at the bottom. Okay, so I took the steer prices from $1.61 down to $1.45. I took the heifers 172 to 155. I increased the cull cow price and I increased the cull bull price. Again, that's kind of what has gone on for the last few weeks as well. So given all that math, his total revenue went from about $750,000 down to $694,000, if all this comes true. Expenses, and again, this is without making any changes except for the prices. So at that point, that $60,000 drop in revenue just cost him a difference of about $55,000. Now, I'm telling you this because I want you thinking about what's going to happen over the next 9 months. So again, if this is the case, what I want you to do is think about what your scenario is. So realistic, who knows what the future holds? I mean, and given the best case, best guess, worst case scenario scale, and if I had a scale from 0 to 100 and the middle was the best guess and the 0 was worst case and the 100 was the best case, I would say that this little scenario that I just gave you is probably somewhere between worst case and best guess. Now I'm going to go back for just a second now and let you study that one more time. So again, I think that's probably somewhere between worst case and best guess. Best case scenario is this thing goes away in a hurry. Donald Trump is correct. The market turns around. Everybody's peachy and everybody's in church on Easter and everybody's got their money back. That is a best case scenario. That's probably, some people would call that a very unrealistic best case scenario, and that's probably true. But somewhere past that, I would hope that this economy kind of picks up. But again, as I stated earlier, the longer that this goes, that it takes to get this thing turned around, the longer it's going to have an impact on the cattle market. So we've got to be aware of that. So somewhere given that, no doubt that the economy is sliding into a recession if we aren't already there. Okay, now again, the question is how long are we going to be there? But anytime we drop into a recession, that impacts the beef price, live cattle price, feeder price, calf prices. But the question is for how long? A lot of people, I mean, I know you guys are kind of like me. You're probably studying this stuff by the minute. It's almost to the point where at some point you just have to turn it off and come back an hour later, just see what the new information was. But given what the jobs report said this morning, how many people filed for unemployment, and this is just the first week that that's actually happened, you know, we're going to set up for the next several weeks for more people to lose their jobs. So that's going to be tough. The question is how quickly we can get them back. So again, I hope we can get them back pretty quickly. So how do you recover $55,000 difference? And again, if I go back 2 slides, that is in fact the difference there, the $55,000 difference from dropping from $21,000 projected income to a loss of $34,000. That $55,000 difference. My question to you guys, I hope you've already started planning this, and what is your number? Okay, what's the number that you're going to have to try to come back to, or find a way to either cut costs or increase revenue or whatever? Bear in mind that we're already 3 months into this year and you've only got 9 months left. Okay, and chances are some of us have probably already bought bulls in January and February. If you haven't, you know, what are you going to pay for the bulls now, given this? Knowing that you've got to come up with some number, because given how the markets have changed and given what you believe your best guess is for what the prices will be this fall, what is your number and how you're going to try to regain that? So what can you start doing now? You know, we've probably already invested in the winter feed program. That's probably over as I look out the window and see all our green grass out here, and life is good in North Texas with all the rain. But again, right now I've already spent my feed bill. Are there other things that I'm planning? So with all that said, what can you do today if you knew that your net income was going to fall by some amount? I want you to be planning that now. How do I make changes now? With the understanding, and again, we don't know exactly what's going on and what is in the aid package, but I guess one thing that's kind of most common is there's going to be about a $1,200 individual payment made and $500 for kids, and you know, again, all dependent upon how much money you've made in either 2018 or 2019. I keep hearing other things about there's another $9 billion or so in there for livestock or special crops and livestock specifically. I don't know what that means. I would look to TSCRA and and even, you know, Nebraska Cattlemen's to really start delving into this package so we can kind of figure out really you know, is there going to be assistance there to help us get back part of that $55,000 or whatever your number is. So I'm going to stop. It looks like we got about 5 minutes. I appreciate the opportunity, and God bless each and every one of you. We'll get through this. If nothing else, this always causes me to stop and reflect about ancestors and fathers and grandfathers and guys. It's people like us out here in rural America that's going to pull up our bootstraps, and guys, we're going to make this thing turn around. We're going to win the game in the end. So thanks to all of you guys that are actually out there. All of us that we found out that we are essential people, and finally we've always known that. But now hopefully everybody else is figuring out that, you know, we're going to supply you with food even if you're in New York City or California. So thanks, and God bless you.
Great. Thank you, Stan. I have been monitoring the chat and haven't seen any questions come through, but now's your chance. Oh, I have a raised hand. I don't know. Forgive me. I'm not sure how to do that. Let's see.
I'm going to turn off my stop share.
Okay. And I've got a screen we can go back to. So if anybody has any questions, if you will, just type them there into the chat box, and we'll be able to help you with that. I'm not able to unmute any lines. So let's see. Copy of the slides. That's a great question. We're actually recording this as well. So we'll share a link to everything that you can then share. But I'll visit with the speakers as well and see if they're willing to share their slides just on their own. But we are recording this, that you can actually go back and view this also. So we do have a great question here. What changes would you suggest to weather the storm? And I'll leave that to either one of you.
Gosh, you know, I guess I'll take a stab at it. I mean, you know, and this isn't anything that I wouldn't tell, you know, even a month ago. You know, mind your P's and Q's. We were going, you know, it's a shame that I understand why we didn't have a cattle convention, and you know, we all know that. There were some of us that were going to be on a cattlemen's college called Making the Hard Decisions, and you know, a month ago, even prior to a month ago, I would tell you, know what your numbers are, know how things are going to get impacted. Now, how can you change things on your place to make it work without knowing the operation? I don't know that I can give you a good answer, but things that always come into play are capital purchase assets. If I'm out here wanting to have new fences, or at least repair a lot of fences, you know, I'm probably going to look at my capital asset expenses first. I am not going to look at stuff that affects my productivity. I still want to get my cows bred. I still want to wean calves. So anything that's going to impact productivity on the cows, I'm going to try to minimize the effect there. But you know, I can go in there and say, well, I'm going to have to put off buying some of these things. So anyway, that's my answer. I'd leave it to Jeff then.
And I'll be honest, Stacy, for this crowd, I do consider Dr. Beavers to be, you know, better versed to handle that question than I am. You know, and it's difficult to talk about risk management at this stage in the game. I guess one bit of input that I would have is looking at today's futures close. We closed these fed cattle futures in the mid to upper 90s in kind of the summer and fall contracts, and we made a low last year around 100. About 6 weeks after the fire at Holcomb. these futures look really, really cheap here. That said, we have got some major uncertainty in play that none of us have ever dealt with. I've seen some questions kind of scroll across the chat to the point of basically sell them now or fight this out, and I wish I had a good answer for that, but I got to be honest that I don't, and you know, a person just has to evaluate their resources, what risk management opportunities might be available at this point in time, and try to answer that question in a fairly mathematical manner, if you will.
Great, thank you. If y'all are willing to stick on just a little bit, I've got a couple more good questions.
I'm fine.
Okay.
More than ready.
Great, thank you. So we've got one that says, so if you've been holding calves and have 550-pound steers ready, do you sell now?
My response to that would be, first off, if they're not contractually obligated, if you hadn't already contracted them or something to that effect already, if you're just going to sell them in the cash market, you know, this is probably the wrong opinion, but it's my opinion. I'm probably going to hold just a little while. And again, I'm up here in wheat country, where we graze a lot of wheat. If I've got something that I can hold them on, I mean, my goodness, wheat price looks like it's going to suck too. So, you know, we'll probably be grazing. I probably shouldn't put it that way. I apologize. You know, I would there's probably going to be a good amount of wheat grazed out. Now, the question again is, well, if I'm telling you to hold them, how long do you have to hold them? Because at some point you've got to sell because they get so large. And you pick a day like today, and again, the way, as Jeff pointed out, the way the board acted today, you know, just scares me to death that you picked the wrong day. And if the market was open tomorrow and used the CME price, you know, to try to generate a value for your calf, you know, tomorrow, you know, it's going to be a rough ride for you. But so I'm telling you, I'm probably holding out for the next couple of weeks for sure, just to see. Now again, this thing can come roaring back just like we've seen, but again, right now it's so volatile that, you know, you pick a day and you might be wrong, and you pick a day and you might be right.
Stacy, I kind of answered that one in tandem with the last question, so I'll let you move on to the next one.
Okay. With the uncertainty in the markets, does a risk management strategy suggest to sell in smaller groups over time rather than all at once?
Well, you would assume so, but there's been too much research done, you know, and I understand what the person is asking. You know, kind of, you know, market on 4 days or 4 times instead of one, where you take the chance of the one day being the wrong. I can understand that, but depending on how large the small group would be, there's been too much research done that the market price will increase as your lot size increases as well. So if we're talking about taking, you know, 50 calves and breaking them into 4 groups and selling them in 10 head, 12 head lots, I'm probably selling the 50 at one time, just because I know that's what the market would prefer, larger lots than smaller lots.
Not a lot that I can add there, Stacy. I'll let you go to the next one.
Okay. What effect on exports will the China trade deal and trade with Europe have for the rest of the year based on the global virus?
Say that one again.
What effect on exports?
You cut out on.
I'm sorry. What effect on exports will the China trade deal and trade with Europe have for the rest of the year based on the global virus?
I think exactly what people are afraid, that, you know, China's economy is, you know, the virus situation apparently has improved dramatically in China, but the fact that there's been damage done to their economy, just like there will be in the U.S. and just like there is in Europe. It's going to take time. And will it impact, exports? Absolutely. Absolutely it will.
I guess, Stacy, this doesn't directly answer that question, but I think that one thing we are fortunate with from a relative sense at this point is that it appears that the virus has been better contained and the curve flattened, if you will, in a more rapid fashion in some of our major export markets for U.S. beef. Two of those in particular being Japan and South Korea.
Okay. I'll go through a couple of others here. We do have some, and for those of you that typed in a question, I'll save these chats, and we may be able to, and questions, and we may be able to help you offline. What can we expect feed prices to do through the summer?
Jeff, you're in Nebraska.
I will be honest, in places here in our state, the worry at this point is more so about feed availability than price. The ethanol industry, which is very prevalent in this part of the world, and a major feed supplier in the form of ethanol byproducts, is under severe financial stress in a good many cases due to the sharp sell-off in crude prices. We're seeing some of these plants close down. So just the availability of that feed source is a real concern to some folks in this part of the world, and we may end up having to restructure some rations pretty quickly to compensate for that. At this point, it would appear that we have ample grain stocks. So as long as we can get a crop in the ground in a fairly timely manner and get it off to a decent start, then from a big picture feed cost standpoint, I feel like we're probably on decent ground here. And I think in this part of the world, and I think in Texas as well, it was a decent year for forage, so people have got some hay around them to get by for a while.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll take one more and then we'll jump off again. There were a lot of questions, so I'm sorry if we didn't get to yours, but this one is with cull or market cattle prices up, does it make sense to sell more of your older cows and hold and raise more replacement heifers?
If I was going to do it, now's probably as good a time as any. And I say that because, from a seasonal standpoint, this is typically the highest prices for cull cows anyway. Okay. Given that, and given the fact that we now seem to have a rush on people wanting hamburger meat because it's one of the easiest things to cook with, and if I'm going to be home, that's probably one of the ingredients I want to cook with. And there, with the demand from that for cull cows and cull bulls, it's probably as good a time as any to go ahead and sell a bunch of cull cows, cull bulls if I was going to anyway. Would I go deeper? Well, possibly, yeah. And depending on, now the question is getting back your number of females that you want. How do you do that? Do you go out there and buy them, or you keep more of your replacement? Do you keep more of your own calves and develop them into replacements? Well, understand, if you keep your own calves, it's going to be 2 years before she drops a calf, that's available to be marketed. So there's going to be a cash flow crunch there for you. do you go out there and buy them? Well, I watched Vermilion's superior sale just for a little bit this morning or this afternoon before it came on here, and good replacement heifers are still bringing, 12 to $1,500 for just, yearling heifers. So, you're trading dimes for nickels. Again, the cull cow prices are good, but what you have to come back with, may not be as cheap as what we think they are. So.
Not a lot to add there, Stacy. I consider Dr. Beavers far more capable on that one than myself.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, again, thank you all for being on today. We are happy to have been able to host this. Again, TSCRA is still working on your behalf. We will be sending a link to the recording, as well as be on the lookout for some surveys or something like that to see how we can continue to serve you in this time. Unfortunately, you're going to see us doing a lot more virtual things right now just because of those things. And yes, I also, Stan, wish we were setting up for the convention today too, but
yeah.
It's
yeah, me too.
it's good to have been here with y'all on this day, and hopefully you got some good information today. And maybe this is a conversation that we can continue, and we're all in this together, and just know that we're working really hard on your behalf. And I just want to thank our speakers for taking their time to do this. They pulled it together very quickly, and really appreciate them taking time out of their busy schedules to do that. But again, be on the lookout for the recording. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to TSCRA. And thank you so much for being on today.
Thank y'all.
Thank you very much.